Hello, you 8 billion divine beings. Welcome to the Experience Podcast. I am a multi-dimensional being having a human experience. My name is Neil, and with me today is a brother and a fellow spiritual being. I invite you to introduce yourself.
My name is Dennis. And like my brother said, I'm a spirit walking around in a meat suit. So very, very excited about what we're going to be talking about today. You want to get into some of your thoughts as far as what we're going to be sharing, and we'll just kind of go from there.
So we're moving into a time where, like, a lot of Americans can have an arrogance to think that things can happen in other countries, but that maybe it doesn't necessarily happen here. And we're moving to a place where supply chains are being affected, and it's beginning to have an effect on prices through inflation as well. And that is going to have an immediate effect on you, the individual, here, let's say in America. And that's one facet. And so what we want to kind of talk about and get into is this thing of like, okay, so once a head of lettuce in a bag is about $15 at a store, are you still going to be continuing to purchase all your food from the store? Because that has an actual potential of being an experience right now. And so, like, some necessities of like where do we get our food, and where do we get our water from? And if there's not any electric, like, are you good to go? Are you going to be able to still have water without electric? There's many things that play into this. And there's this thing called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And in this hierarchy of needs, he talks about how, like, there's things that basically have to be met, some needs of the individual, until that that individual can focus on other priorities or a new priority, and like say his next one at that point. So once he met his one priority that he was maybe wanting to, until that one is met, then only can he then focus on his next priority. So I want to get into like this hierarchy of needs, and first off, I'll read them in order, in the way that Maslow explains it, and then after that I'll go more in depth about each. He calls them needs, but you don't need anything if you want it. So we'll call them psychological wants that you're going to want to have so that you can move on to your next priority. So number one is psychological needs. That's number one. That's the first thing that's got to be met before you can basically move on to any of the next one of these.
And now, when you say psychological needs, like, what are you referring to? Are you referring to?
So we're going to get into that in depth after I read these.
All right. Good.
So number two, safety needs, safety wants. We'll call them wants. Number 3, love and belonging wants. Number 4, esteem wants. And number 5, self-actualization wants. So now let's get some into depth with these. So the psychological needs are like, some would be like your bare necessities. So with the psychological, this is going to be including food, water, clothing, sleep, and shelter. And those are some of the bare necessities for a person's survival, an individual. And that would be some of the psychological needs, because those, your food, your water, your clothing, your sleep, and your shelter, I guess, would have an effect on your psychology. So that's number 1. Number 2 is safety and security wants. And once a person's basic needs are satisfied, which would be what we just talked about, substance abuse, trauma, PTSD, mental or physical health challenges are difficult to address without a long-term safe place to live. So this is where the safety aspect comes in. You've got to be able to have some security to be able to take care of yourself in an orderly manner. If you don't have a place where you can, say, rest and heal up and take care of yourself, then that's where this is one of your wants. So this is the second want in the hierarchy of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So safety, a place where you can have a place to be. Number 3, love and belonging needs. This is for the wants for family and connection. Even people living on the street feel this love and connection want. And then you see that in street gangs or even homeless camps, because they still feel love and connection from the other people that they're around. So that's number 3, the love and belonging wants. Number 4, esteem. This is about confidence and respect for others. That's important for people working to maintain employment and recovery from addiction. And that can only happen after love and belonging with the esteem. And this is all according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So take it with a grain of salt, do your own research with this video and all other videos you watch, and also research your research.
And use your own discernment. Very, very important. Don't just take anybody's word for it.
So that's the esteem needs. And number 5 is self-actualization. And now this is when we crave a purposeful life. It's very rewarding when you feel like you've reached your highest potential. However, this final step looks and feels different for everyone. So the self-actualization is where you would find your purpose, and you would find your reason for being here. And that would be the final want in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So I found that super fascinating and amazing how he puts it in an order that to where one priority has got to be met before the next one does. And I find that aspect interesting. How do you feel about that? Just going over the hierarchy of needs as we did.
Sure, well, as you were reading those off and you went a little bit more in depth. I kept on because when you were talking about the safety needs and the love and the belonging and the esteem and the self-actualization, like those all tie into, I feel like being able to thrive in today's society. I feel like those 5 points of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, literally if an individual or if a being has a place where they can bring up their family and be totally self-sufficient in raising their family and their loved ones, I feel like that is the basis of thriving for the family unit if someone was totally self-sustainable. And I think it would cover all 5 of those talking points.
Yes. And it's literally what he's explaining is because like he's elaborating on like this is the way for say an individual. Like
it's really amazing. I think
it's like almost to like a science of like this is the healthiest way.
Sure. And and this is like this morning, you just hearing that right now from Neil. This is the first time that I heard about Maslow's hierarchy of needs as well. So I'm just as new to hearing this as you are. But I see that as when I see that and I hear it, I feel like it's this whole aspect of thriving in your own environment and setting yourself up for success, not only in the present moment, but in the future. Because the whole reason for this video, I feel, is we're talking about preparing and setting ourselves up for thriving. So the powers that be, and Neil mentioned the supply chains and the systems breaking down, that is a reality. Like we can no longer just stick our head in the sands and be like, oh no, it's not happening. It won't happen here in the United States of America because we're supposedly the greatest. No, it's happening as we speak. So, and it's not something to be afraid of, because if we prepare, it can actually be some of the greatest times of our lives if we set ourselves up for success. So that's something that I want to bring out, is not to prepare based out of fear, but prepare out of a place of knowledge and wisdom and discernment and power. So what other things can you, before we move on, like what other things came to your mind when you were reading those things?
I really felt into the sociological needs as number 1.
Yes, okay.
Because with that, it's your food, your water, your clothing, your sleep, and your shelter. And so what can you control in this universe? Very little. And you may be able to be consciously aware of your emotions and be able to not put attention to them. But one thing that you have some aspect of conscious awareness over is your sleep. So you can begin to get enough sleep today. And that's one of the first sociological needs. So that really stuck out to me. Like, number 1, if you start to get enough sleep, like you're already going to feel more focused to prioritize some of these other things, like say water or food. And that's sort of, I really felt into that.
That's very interesting, because I totally agree with that. And it's like, if you don't have the proper sleep, and you'll be well rested, your mind won't, your cognition you won't be able to use that discernment and good judgment to make good decisions to help you thrive in the future and to prepare right now. Like, what can you do today to prepare for the supply chain breakdowns. Like, what are you gonna do when you can only buy $10 of gas per week or something like that? I mean, it's something to think about. Like, for me personally, I try to think of the worst possible scenario, and then what can I do to buffer that and prepare so that I can thrive through that, just in case it were to happen. Not saying it will, but there is a highly likelihood that it will. So with the supply chains breaking down. And when you were talking about the psychological, the bare necessities, like I really want to talk a little bit more about that as well, because I feel like it's important, especially for the people that live in the city, and you're thinking to yourself, well, how can I prepare for, let's just take food for example. Let's talk about food for a little bit. Like, what can people do right now, Neil, to prepare themselves and set themselves up to thrive with food? Like, what can they do to bring somebody's got a family, or even if they're single or whatever, what can they do to start setting themselves up to thrive around the aspect of food, to have an abundance of food in the future?
Yes. So I want to talk about, say, living in the country first of all. And so if you live away from the city per se, and you have some kind of a land, a garden is an amazing thing. And a garden is where you put seeds in, and then you get to experience the growth from it and experience food in that aspect. So that's a great opportunity. And
what if somebody does not have like much acreage?
Yes, and I do want to get into that. And so that's like if you're in the country, but so let's say you're in the city and you, like Dennis was saying, you do not have that acreage. So at that aspect, or with that, it's actually, that's a very inspirational aspect to me, is creating food sources from little to no acreage, and on buildings and in buildings. When you look overseas and you look at like, I believe China has some of this, I don't know exactly, but where they have outdoor gardens on their buildings, and
Singapore,
the buildings are designed to produce life giving plants, and it cleans the air in these cities. And also you can have indoor, if you have an outside window, you can have an indoor garden in your apartment. There's various options, and I feel very inspired, because I feel like in the future, that is what our cities are going to look like. And currently, as the cities are, I feel like they are unsustainable because they're very dependent on supplies. And I feel like we're going to begin to see a influx of infrastructure that has gardens built into the structure of the building, actually adding to the building rather than taking from
it. And something that I just researched a little bit before this podcast is indoor grow kits. Like, you can get online and find systems that, if you live in the city, like, you can literally grow lettuce and greens in your house. And some of the prices that I've seen are pretty expensive, but I know that if you would go on YouTube and just do a little bit of research, I'm sure you could make your own for probably little to nothing at this point. I mean, at this time, before things go ballistic as far as inflation goes.
And that's the thing, now is the time.
now is like today's the day, because it's a fact that the US dollar is losing value at the fastest pace that it's ever. And that's because we're no longer tied to the gold standard. It's fiat currency, fiat money, which is basically monopoly money. And like Neil said, it's not sustainable. Here's another thing that you can do if you're in the city, or if you're living in the suburbs. I mean, this is a little mason jar, and this is what they call a sprouting lid. And these are sprouting alfalfa seeds. So you could go get a whole bunch of these. All you do is you put a little bit of this in there, soak them for a night, take them out, and yeah, there's another thing you can do more research. I'm not going to talk much about it, but it's very, very easy, very simple, and alfalfa has a lot of nutrients in it for you. So what about and another thing that I'm going to mention too that I've personally been doing is this is just something else that you can do, is buy a dehydrator, like a food dehydrator.
Yes.
And a vacuum sealer. And anytime you go get groceries, you can buy a little bit extra fruits, vegetables, whatever, and dehydrate them, foods that you like. And you can vacuum seal it, put a little, forget what they call those, but the
Dry packets.
yes, the dry packets, to where it'll take out your moisture. And that's another way that you can store food. Now, is that sustainable? No. But what it will allow you to do is it can allow you to focus on these other 5 needs on the hierarchy of needs that Maslow talks about. So what that can do is, if you store this food away, it can allow you to have time to focus on these other areas. Like if you have 6 kids or whatever, it might allow you to now not have to prepare food, and you'll be able to make clothing for your children and your family. So it's just something to think about. Do you have anything else that you would like to add as far as food goes, or?
I feel very confident with what has been expressed.
Okay. And if you can plant a garden, if you have even 1 acre and you got a little plot that you can, I mean, it's very, very vital that we as a society start being 100% self sustainable. Like, we have to be self-reliant, because we can see what's happened with the things that have been going on in the last 2 years. Like, there's nobody in authority or government that we can trust anymore. Like, they don't have our best interests at heart. So it's very, very important that we depend on ourselves and we take ownership of our own lives. So getting into, let's talk a little bit about water. What are some things that people can do if they pay for water, like in the city? When I lived in the city, I always had to pay for water every month. What are things that you think, Neil, that people can do to start thinking about water and being self-reliant around the water aspect?
That's a fascinating aspect, and I feel like if you're living in the city and you're buying water either from paying from it for the city, or through buying bottled water or water that way, if that's how you get your water, that's got to change right now. And because that is not sustainable at all. And I was suggesting collecting rainwater, but when you even collect rainwater in heavy traffic areas, such as a city, the rainwater often has pollutants in it. But I do feel like, in certain areas of less dense cities, rainwater collection would be an amazing option, because then you could boil and filter the rainwater after you had received it to remove whatever small pollutants may have been in it. And I feel like that's a very viable option, more so sometimes than going for streams, because a lot of the waterways in the cities are have particles in them that all streams have particles in them, but a lot of the city streams have particles that are unnatural, and that, so I feel like rainwater is a very viable option. And but I feel like if you're dependent on bottled water and city water, that's unsustainable, and I feel like that has to change. It doesn't have to, but it's the process of receiving it is going to change, I feel like.
And another thing that you could look into is, I mean, and there's probably some codes and different regulations and so forth, but there's always ways around it. And remember, we're doing this to help you. We're talking about these things so that your family can thrive. So what I was gonna say is that if you're in the city, there's very likely some codes and regulations that you have to buy the city water, and that you're not allowed to install like a well pump, for instance, where you just dig a hole and you put a water pump in it and then you can get water that way. The city very likely will frown upon that, but I'm not advising you, or don't take this advice or anything, but there's ways around that. And somebody that I just talked to recently lives in a city, and he actually installed a pump, and he built a little building right around it, so that if the city comes in and they look at their backyard, whatever, they'll just think that it's a little building. But in this little building, he's got a water pump that he can go out there anytime he wants, and he can. So just remember, I mean, the government's not going to be looking out for you when you don't need water, or when you need water. So you just got to use your own discernment there and your own judgment as far as if you want to go against the codes and the regulations, but that's going to be your own call. I'm just putting that out there. So something that I want to touch on food. We were talking about seeds. I think that it's very important when we buy seeds to not buy seeds that are hybrid seeds, because those you cannot dry and use the next following year. So what you want to do is you want to buy heirloom seeds if you're planting a garden. That way you can take the seeds that you take from the plants and the harvest that you have, and you reuse those seeds for the next season. So do you have anything else that you would like to add, Neil, on the water aspect?
I feel good with the water aspect.
What about is there anything else that you think is important that we should go over? Some that we haven't talked about, or one thing that I think that when we were getting ready for this podcast is heating sources. Everybody's dependent on the power grid. Well, I think it was last year. Yes, it was last year. The World Economic Forum, they did an exercise called Cyber Polygon, and what it was is a supposedly terrorist attack on the power grid. So what are you gonna do? What am I gonna do when there's no longer, the igniter on the furnace doesn't go on because there's no electricity? This is just something to think about. Firewood might be an option. What are your thoughts on that?
I feel like with the heating aspect, I feel like humans have survived on every single continent in every single climate since the beginning of time. So I feel like we've got that covered.
Awesome. And with that, I very much appreciate y'all listening. And use your own discernment with this information. Stay thriving, be blessed, much love.